And good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome all to the public forum. This public forum entitled the Revival of Africanism Forum. Okay, and thank you so much for taking your time away from your busy schedule to be here this afternoon. We are very honored and very happy to see this many faces and all of you today. Well, my name is Corinne.
Thank you very much for being here. We started this forum in 2007, and it was in the month of March. And I'm going to express some thanks to a number of people, particularly the Ambassador Kokora, who was our first supporter. I did not say one of our early supporters. I say he was the first supporter 5 years ago. I would like you to give him a round of applause for his commitment and dedication to support younger people and to support anything that is related to Ivory Coast and to the cause of Africa. I would like to thank particularly Georges Duncan also, because he's the one who helped us secure this room. It was difficult to find a venue for the first conference. And this year we're going to have a series of conferences, but it was complicated. But thanks to Georges Duncan, we could be here today. I would like you to give him a round of applause. I would like to thank my friends. George is one of them, Cynthia Beru, Abu Fofana, and of course Mjiba, who is on the floor, on the panel, and Maurice Kane, and we work together, to put together this conference. And Karim Belinga, and who accepted to be the moderator of this conference. Let's give them a round of applause also. This year we will certainly do a series of conferences, and next week, in 3 weeks, we may will have Dr. Molefi Kete Asante, who is going to talk about Obama's presidency and its impact on Africa and the global African community. It's going to be in 3 weeks, March the 24th. When you secure a venue, you're going to be posted about that event. Thank you very much for being here, and you were supposed to be here, and I hope we're going to have a wonderful conversation and enjoy. Thanks.
Oui, après mon Afrique, vous avez la conférence internationale de la journée de la femme qui a été organisé par les panafricanismes, et l'organisateur que vous venez de voir tout à l'heure, Monsieur Gervais Niaka, qui est originaire de la Côte d'Ivoire. Et à la présentation, vous avez Karim Belinga de Cameroun. En fait, la conférence, tout à l'heure, nous aurons Anna Mwalago, qui est musicien du Kenya, panafricaniste, pardon. Et cette conférence, en fait, c'est une conférence sur l'Afrique, et les intervenants ici vont nous parler de tout ce qui parle de l'Afrique. Anna Mwalago, qui est du Kenya, très très réputée comme musicienne, en fait poète et chanteuse, danseuse, qui va venir animer cette conférence. Ça, c'est la première partie de la conférence parce qu'elle a fait 4 heures de temps. Le but de cette conférence est d'éduquer, et les intervenants disent que le panafricanisme existe depuis très longtemps et que leur but premier, c'est d'éduquer les gens sur l'histoire de l'Afrique et sur le combat africain. Donc nous sommes là à la conférence panafricanisme ici pour présenter la journée internationale de la femme qui commence aujourd'hui. Plein de conférences sont organisées, plein de trucs sont organisés au programme. Restez surtout connectés sur Après Mon Afrique TV. Vous Claire, c'est mon nom,
Tina, no soit pour voyo, woza moya, woza moya, woza moya, woza moya, woza moya, ahi gewele kosi sikelela. Tina lusa polwayo. God bless Africa. May her spirit rise up high. Hear the prayers. God bless us. God bless Africa. God bless our families. Descend, oh Spirit, descend, 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 oh Spirit, descend, 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 oh Spirit, descend, oh Spirit. God bless us, God bless Africa, God bless our families. Before we start, it is important for us to see and be aware that today we have an all-women's panel, and we are also in the month. Hey! Mama, way. As the flower of Africa blooms, so does a new day for the women of Africa unfold. From the time of her delivery, the African woman was known to be a liability and not a profit, a loss and not a gain. She was to be seen but not to be heard, to be abused, accused, humiliated and despised. Yet women of Africa and women of the world have evolved and transcended despite their hardship. They have survived inequalities, disintegration, physical, verbal, and emotional abuse. Women of Africa have survived carrying firewood on their heads, bags of food on their backs, a child on their breast, all at the same time while walking to the market, talking to themselves, for their voices were not to be heard. But still we rise. We rise because of women who paved way for equality and justice. Women like Wangari Maathai, the first African woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize, President Ellen Johnson, the first woman to be elected president in an African country, Mother Teresa, Eleanor Roosevelt, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, and of course you and I. We rise because we wear many hats. We are mothers, teachers, politicians, managers, even soldiers, and still humble enough to be ideal wives. We rise because our struggles have made us stronger. Thus our backbones have not weakened but hardened to be strong as those of camels. And so as we celebrate one another today, I urge all the women to rally with one another as we face new challenges of HIV and AIDS, poverty, breast cancer, and other underlying problems, yet still fighting for proper equality and respect. Let us empower one another with knowledge so we can help eradicate some of
Anna
these
Malago qui dans
problems.
ce
For
poème,
knowledge is power and lack of it is death. Let us empower one another
dans ce
through
poème, vante
education
donc comme ça
so
les
we can
mérites de
teach
la
all
femme
the boys
africaine et de la
and
femme du
girls
monde.
the value
Elle
of
qui
the
dit que les
girl
femmes
child and her need to be respected.
doivent
Let us
avoir les
empower
mêmes
one another
égalités que les hommes.
economically
Elle
so
qui
that
dit
we
que les
can
femmes
become
sont celles qui
financially
font tous les
independent,
travaux,
for
qui
we
se lèvent le
are the
matin, qui vont au
foundation
marché,
of
qui
the
préparent,
home. Without
qui se
us,
battent
the
pour la
house
suivi de la
will not
famille.
stand.
Elle a
Let us
cité par
empower,
exemple
partner and work
la
together
première
for
femme
united
du
we stand
président au
and
Libéria. Elle a
divided
donné
we
plein de
fall,
personnalités
and we
des
all
femmes
need each other. Let us
qui ont des
empower,
premiers rangs dans le
partner,
monde.
and work
Et
together
elle est là en
to
train de
educate our
vanter les
women
mérites
is to educate the whole nation,
du
because it
pouvoir
takes
de
a
la
home
femme.
to
Pour
build
elle, la femme est à la
a nation.
fondation du
And
monde.
even
La femme est à la
though our
fondation de
struggles
tout, au
still
centre de tout. Sans la
continue,
femme,
let us
rien ne
not
peut être
forget
possible. Elle donne
that
naissance,
we,
elle
the
prépare,
women, have already won
elle fait tout.
the battle.
Donc, Anna Mwalago, qui avance les mérites de la femme et qui réclame les femmes et les hommes.
Come after her. But our next guest is a powerhouse of her own also. She is Njiva please help me. Freehewat. And she's a PhD activist, Pan-Africanist, alum of Howard University, and a member of All African People Revolutionary Party, presents Pan-Africanism, the only solution.
Thank you, sister. Okay, so we actually have a PowerPoint that we're getting ready to set up, so it'll take us like 30 seconds.
Oui, et là on annonce là notre sœur qui est d'origine africaine mais de nationalité américaine parce qu'elle est sur le territoire une véritable activiste du panafricanisme qui va nous entretenir là pendant quelques minutes. Madame Djiba. Avoir connu M. Nyaka à l'université, l'organisateur de cette conférence depuis 2002. Et elle va nous donner la vision de ce qu'elle pense de l'Afrique et de la femme africaine.
And please bear with us, there may be a little bit of technical difficulties, which are moving quickly right along. And so today, while they're getting it together, I'm going to talk about Pan-Africanism, which is the only solution. And we say that because the All-African People's Revolutionary Party is clear that the unification of Africa is the only solution for African people wherever we are. So that's what the title of my presentation is today. And while they're working that out, I'm going to keep moving. So the All-African People's Revolutionary Party identifies Pan-Africanism as a total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. So everybody may not identify it the same way, but ultimately when you think about Pan-Africanists and people who identify Pan-Africanism, it's really about liberating and unifying Africa, right? Has anybody heard of anyone that doesn't talk about liberating and unifying Africa if they're Pan-Africanists? Right? Everyone says that, okay? So the economic system that we identify, that we believe is the correct economic system, is important, but not as important as liberating and unifying Africa and African people. So I just want to break it down quickly. When we say liberating, we know, and I may be talking to the choir a bit, but I just want to run through this so that we're all clear, we're on the same page. When we talk about liberation, we're talking about liberating all people of African descent, both on the continent and off of the continent. Both were born at home and live in the diaspora. Folks that were born in the diaspora and live at home. And here we go. Moving forward here. All right. So I'm going to back up because this is a picture that was in the Accra Evening News in Ghana during Nkrumah's time. And it says, "People of Africa unite." And it speaks very clearly. This picture was somewhere between 1961 and 1966. And we know in Ghana everyone doesn't necessarily fluently read English, right? We know that throughout the African continent everyone doesn't fluently read French and Portuguese, but you don't have to read English to know what this says. This is saying, let's get the chains up off of our back. Let's get the yoke of colonialism, neocolonialism, slavery, and imperialism off of our backs so that we can move forward and unite as African people. So, again, liberation of all people of African descent, unification from foreign exploitation, neocolonialism, colonialism, and puppet independence. Now, we say puppet independence because we know all 56 countries in the African continent have independence, right? And how many of them have economic independence? Our boy Libya, right? Our country Libya, there, our boy Gaddafi. There was some level of economic independence. What happened? NATO comes in, has an illegal war, kills the brother, right? And now that economic independence has been shifted back to puppet independence, right? Just as a side note, we know that in Tripoli and various places throughout the country, the NTC, these various groups are now fighting for what? Power. Very interesting. Scientific socialism. We believe that we don't believe scientific socialism is an economic system which basically puts the resources in the hands of the people and political power. We know when we say socialism, we get nervous. We think about the Soviet Union. We think about dictators. That's not what it's about. At the end of the day, we're talking about the people need to have the opportunity to control their resources. There has to be some level of common ownership of the bauxite, of the gold, of the diamonds, of the human labor, so that we can control our lives. We can't control our lives right now. Why? Because we don't control our resources. Production for use and not for profits. Right now, the production is for profits. We're producing for profits and not profits for ourselves. And then, of course, there's planned methods of production by the state based on the needs of the community. And this is important because people say, oh, no, you're going to plan how I go to school or what I wear or what my house looks like. But be clear, in a capitalist society, there's planned methods of production. You're not in the plan, but there is planned methods of production. And that's in any economic system, any society, there has to be some level of planning. And then political power, of course, has to be in the hands of the people. So why Pan-Africanism? We talk about Pan-Africanism, but let's ask ourselves really why. Why do we need to liberate and unify? Because I, as an African living wherever I am, maybe I'm okay. Maybe I'm eating every day and I'm good. However, we know there's many people who are not eating every day. But one of the key things is to restore the dignity of Africa and African people. Kwame Nkrumah says we need to be able to manage our own affairs. We are not managing our own affairs. Regardless of what happens in the African continent, there's external intervention from the West. Now, if Africa was liberated and unified, A, we'd be able to manage our own affairs, but B, you wouldn't be able to have external intervention so quickly, so swiftly, and we'd be able to stand up. What happened in Libya? That's a great example. The AU said, wait a minute, we don't think it's correct for NATO to go in to Libya. What'd they do? NATO said, okay, that's cool. I'm glad that's your opinion, right? Good luck with that, but we're still going in. Because we don't have we're not unified enough to fight off, right? Fight off an army, another quote-unquote nation. Now, that's great, restoring the dignity, but really, at the end of the day, Pan-Africanism is about resolving the African casualties that occur every day. Like right now, at this very second, somebody's dying of hunger. Not just on the African continent, throughout the African world. There's children right here in D.C. that don't eat every day. That would be resolved if Africa is liberated and unified. War. We know there's been how many wars in the last 4 years on the African continent? Sparked by the United States of America? Many, right? Poverty. How many of our people are living around the world in poverty? African continent, $1 to $2 a day. The diaspora, where do we find ourselves in regards to the quote-unquote quintile? At the bottom. There's nobody that goes below us. That's a problem, right? It's 1 million people in the world and we're at the bottom? Something is wrong with that. It's wrong. Let me tell you what's wrong. We're not unified and liberated so we can fight to get from the bottom and fight for the dignity of our people. Natural disasters. Let's look at Haiti. Infrastructure. Lack of infrastructure. Because again, we're not controlling our resources and our land.
Cette femme qui fait un débat sur l'Afrique, sur le pourquoi l'Afrique n'avance pas assez, pour elle, il y a plusieurs aspects qu'elle a touchés. L'agriculture, l'habitat. Elle accuse beaucoup d'aspects de l'Afrique qui font en sorte que le continent africain ne puisse pas connaître une émergence. Donc, elle nous donne un cours là de ce qu'elle entend par le panafricanisme de l'Afrique. Donc, une certaine façon de donner les conseils au peuple africain, selon elle, économiste de son État, de ce que les Africains peuvent faire pour sortir de l'engrenage financier et économique où elles se trouvent en ce moment. Donc, en fait, c'est sa défense et elle dit à Nia qu'elle avait raconté une histoire. Elle dit à Nia qu'elle n'est pas se sentie blessée. En 96, elle était en Côte d'Ivoire. Elle était avec quelques amis. Ils sont allés quelque part.
Which is not inflicted upon ourselves, it's because of the exploitation, the education that we receive that is Eurocentric, both formal and informal. It's true. And it's killing us from the inside out.
En tant que panafricaniste, il se présentait, bonsoir, je suis de tel pays, je suis de tel pays. Ils ont demandé à quelqu'un d'où es-tu?
Because guess what? We have 56 countries. We're scattered around the world. We have no real land base that we control. So you have to have a land is power. History has shown us from African country to the civil rights movement to everything that you must be unified in order to achieve your objective. That objective being Pan-Africanism.
Donc pour elle n'a pas compris
the world economy.
qu'un Africain
This is
noir
something that I think that as African people, maybe in this room we get, but like as
avec tout ce
African
qui est
people, do we
noir
really
sur
get
lui,
it? That like our
disent
exploitation
Réni
fuels the
qui soit
world
africain et
economy?
qui disent
That the
directement qu'il
oil
est
that you put
français.
in your car comes from Africa, and if it didn't come from Africa, you wouldn't be able
Je
to
ne
drive
crois
nowhere.
pas à
Like, I
au
don't think
fait
that we really understand the
d'être
impact, the
français.
real significant impact that Africa and African
C'est
people
vrai.
have. If we decided to live a different lifestyle, the world would have
Une
no
pure
choice but to do
vérité.
that. Right?
Les gens comme
We
ça
are being
qui
exploited.
détestent d'être
So the world
africains
is
et qui
doing what
se
the
font
world
passer
wants with
pour
our people. A problem.
des
56 countries in
Européens.
the African continent. We don't have the strength. No
Et
disrespect
dit,
to any country.
elle dit
Gambia.
être offensée par
Gambia,
cela.
a small country, a
Donc pour elle, en fait, les
inside
Africains devraient être fiers de
Who
ceux
in the world are you
qui sont
gonna fight?
africains
Certainly not the U.S., right?
et
Let's go
que
to Southern Africa.
c'est
Let's go to
déplorable pour elle.
Swaziland. A very
Donc
small
en fait,
country inside
c'est
of
juste
Tanzania.
une façon
Who
de
in the world
décrire
you gonna fight?
ce qu'elle entend
Even Southern Africa.
par le panafricanisme
Because
et
the-
ce qu'elle
and we
entend
don't have
par
the As a small country,
le
our
continent
numbers are
africain
small.
dans tous
We
les
don't have the
aspects.
military technology as one small country, but as a continent, absolutely we have it. And what happens is if we all of those issues that we had, you see, go throughout the African world, the same issues exist. I don't care what you speak, I don't care how you look, I don't care how tall you are, how short you are, how thick you are, how skinny you are, I don't care where you were born. When it comes to HIV/AIDS, we're at the top of the food chain, right? We got it. When it comes to owning our resources, we don't. So these conditions are not changing. They're not changing from country to country. They're not changing from diaspora to the continent. We have the same contradictions wherever we go. And then, most importantly, like, we're not benefiting from capitalism. Like, if someone can convince me that we're benefiting from capitalism, I might become a capitalist. We ain't benefiting. Like, if you can't eat, you're not benefiting. It's not about, okay, I want to control and get all the money that DuPont or the Steve Jobs guys get. If my people can't eat, my baby's going to bed hungry every day. There's rain. I have nothing to shelter me from the rain. It's cold outside. I don't have any heat. I'm not benefiting from capitalism. So there's got to be a different
Bon,
way.
elle se plaint un peu du système ici aux États-Unis. Elle dit le système capitaliste ne la profite pas parce que elle fait presque tout et le coût de la vie est difficile pour elle. Donc pour elle, elle pense que le capitalisme n'est pas un système qui bénéficie, dont elle bénéficie, elle qui est mère. Donc elle parle un peu de Kwame Nkrumah et le Ghanéen. Qui pour elle, sa politique était meilleure que le capitalisme.
The Convention People's Party integrated Pan-African policies in New Ghana. You look at their development plan, you see Pan-Africanism scroll throughout it. This is what we need to do on the African continent. They integrated Pan-African institutions
les gens qui vont,
throughout the state.
qui disent
Most importantly, they opened Ghana's borders
nous sommes de la diaspora, je n'ai pas de problème avec ça, mais
well, maybe I'll say I believe that may have been the detriment of Kwame Nkrumah. Had he closed his
tout ça
borders,
n'aide
said,
pas
you
les
free
pays
to what
africains.
y'all do over there, good luck, you're still, enslaved, that's not my
Donc ces
problem.
femmes, si ont décidé de déballer un peu leur façon de penser et de voir les choses en Afrique, elles sont tous, comme on appelle des panafricanismes, celles qui défendent la cause africaine. Et elles ont profité de cette journée internationale de la femme, cette semaine de la femme, pour déballer toutes leurs connaissances autour d'une table. Et elle donne son cours à sa façon. Beaucoup vont intervenir. Ici, nous sommes à la première partie de cette vidéo qui va commencer. Dommage pour les gens de l'expression française, nous ne pouvons pas tout traduire de cette vidéo, mais bon, retenez que le but de cette conférence est juste une façon d'apporter les différentes connaissances dans les différents domaines et de parler de l'Afrique, du continent africain et de ce qui fait problème pour l'émergence de notre continent ou alors de ce qui pourrait être une solution pour l'émergence de notre continent. C'est en fait ça, on ne peut pas traduire mot par mot tout ce qu'elles disent, mais bon, l'exposition est faite ici par une
right
une
now on the
Africaine
African
d'origine,
continent. It could be implemented wherever
mais
we
née
are.
sur le
So
sol
it's like
américain
oftentimes we
et
think, oh, Pan-Africanism, Africa, we have to have state
nous
power.
donne
Absolutely
sa
not,
façon de
because
voir les
Pan-Africanism
choses
needs to be
et
of the people's
de
movement.
comment le
Because you
continent
cannot
africain
expect
peut,
somebody that's getting
par rapport à
kicked back
l'histoire
from the
des
IMF
Kwame
World Bank to
Nkrumah
sit
et
down
des
with
autres
Pan-Africa.
qui ont
Because that's
été
not
des,
gonna benefit them,
des
right?
patriotiques panafricanisme de ce continent, sortir du néocolonialisme et des forces qui nous empêchent d'évoluer librement en Afrique. C'est un peu ça le but de la conférence. Donc nous allons continuer à vous faire voir cette conférence jusqu'à la fin de la semaine prochaine, jusqu'à la fin du mois de mars pour la journée internationale de la femme.
From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, right? That's our media, that's our education, that's our principles and the principles and ideas that we guide our life by. So if those principles and ideas are individualistic in form, if those principles and ideas positively benefit the world market, free trade, and the West, regardless as to where we live, then they're not going to be for us. So we're not going to have Pan-African ideas. We're not going to be talking about collectivism. We're going to be talking about what can I get? How can I benefit from capitalism? And the cold part about it is, you don't even know you're being governed by an ideology. Because if your enemy tells you that they're governing you by an ideology that's anti-you, that's going to negatively impact you, you'll do something about it, right? So you just govern because it's so smooth and cool the way it's done. And me and Brother Comrade John, we were driving and we were talking about the lack of culture in this country. And we were talking about how we individualistically move, right? So you roll into somebody's house. They speak to you. They've not seen you in a long time. They just speak and walk away. They don't ask how your family is. They don't ask how your drive was. They don't ask, are you all right? They don't say, is the weather good? Because we've lost that collective culture, which goes in our ideology. As somebody who's collective, I want to know how your family is, how the drive was. Are you okay? Do you need anything? How can I assist you? Then, of course, this was a nucleus for ideological education for the CPP, Freedom Fighters, Ghanaians, and the All-African Conference series. And this is important because changing your ideology, transforming the way you think and how you make decisions and how you see the world is like an everyday process. In the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, we have something we call work study. And we meet every 2 weeks, and we read from a book list, and we discuss that, and we're able to help to transform not just our ideology, but our behavior. Because we want to take that ideological change and implement into our behavior changes. You can have a wonderful ideology that's about Pan-Africans. We've seen throughout the 10-year that Africans on the continent have ran and won on a Pan-Africanist agenda. But when they got in, they didn't implement it. Because they weren't able to transform, that agenda to ideological changes, not just within the government, but within the masses of people. That's A. And then B, it may not have really been what they were after. They may have been after some individual benefits, but they use a collective, which they know as African culture. Collectivity is very important in order to meet their individual needs. And I'm going to move because I don't even know what the time frame is, sister. But and then, I'm fine. Thank you so much. Because I could get a little excited. Then the Ghana Young Pioneer Movement. We know that we have youth that are running around the African world doing nothing, with no direction, right? The Ghana Young Pioneer Movement took youth throughout the entire African continent. We see here within a few years they had a membership of 500,000. And did what? Said, it's your civic responsibility to Africa and Ghana to become a model citizen. That means that you must protect your land at all costs. And more than that, put in the spirit of volunteerism, expose members to the ideals of African unity, and that means not just Pan-Africanism, but what's going on in East Africa, what's going on in South Africa, how that benefits you, but also gave these young people key skills so that they could do something with their time. We hear people all the time talking about, these young people, they don't do anything. They're on the corner, they're running around the crowd, they're running around Dar, they're doing this, they're in Southeast. They have nothing to do. They're just a menace to society. Well, there's no Pan-African institutions that can give folks who are younger an opportunity to do something. We know this education system, both here in the U.S. and on the African continent and throughout the African diaspora is not for us, particularly for African men. So you have African boys in these classrooms who are being shut out based on a structure of education that was created for European men. Yeah. So we wonder why our children are running the streets, because we have not offered them an alternative to what they already get.
That's it.
Particularly when we're talking about right here, there's how much is it to get into school? It's not, you can't get a college degree like you could get one when I went to undergrad. Front and back is gone. So you graduate from high school, what do? There's no job. You're in Detroit. There's absolutely no jobs in Detroit. What do? I'm going to be on the corner too, because I'm not going to sit in the house all day, right? Let's go back home. There's one university, 2 universities in the entire country. You have to pass your qualifying exams from secondary school if you get to secondary school. If you have a place in secondary school, then you have to pay school fees. I can't do none of that. What the heck am I going to do? Believe me, the selling oranges on your head, selling water, selling groundnuts, that whole market is sold up. Because we got the mamas and the grandmamas that have been doing that for years. So a young man of 18 is not going to get in that market. So what do? You roam around. You find something to eat. You see if you can get a few bucks off of a tourist so you can feed yourself. Perhaps even take that money back to your family who may or may not have running water, may or may not have electricity, may or may not have a stable place to live. And we, those who we call older folks, elders, whatever the case may be, we judge our youth. We have to stop judging our youth. We have to, if we want them to follow in our footsteps, they're not going to see the footsteps unless we're walking in front of them. And right now, we're not walking in front of them, we're not walking behind them, we're running away from them because we're scared. And we have to not be afraid of our youth and our people. Because they are going to be the ones that are going to be taking Pan-Africanism to the next level. And if they're running around the streets of Dar or Harare or Southeast DC, they're not taking anything. They're not taking Pan-Africanism to the next level. They're concerned about feeding themselves. So where would we be? Still at the bottom. Moving right along. So then this moves us into this concept of how do we alternatively target folks or provide these resources to folks who maybe don't have the education level that everyone in this room has. How many people are going to come out and look at somebody, listen to somebody, using a PowerPoint, doing all this? Some may not. If everyone, in the African world had that level of education and that level of excitement, they would be in this room right now, would be full, right? They'd be standing room only. We see some empty chairs, it's a good crowd. However, we have to be able to target our youth, our elders, everyone in between differently. Ghana did that. They had the National Theater Movement. And what they went around the country and they put together plays and dances and songs to talk about the issues in the community and how folks could get involved. Another issue is, and this is, I'm diverging, but I'm going to throw this out here, is that all national languages on the African continent are European based, right? Mostly. Maybe 2 aren't, okay? So we'll give 2. I don't read French and I'm in Abidjan or I'm outside of Abidjan, if I don't read Portuguese and I'm in Mozambique, how am I in the political process? If I need to go vote, or I need to know what your policies are, but I don't read what you're writing in, I'm left out of the political process, right? Which is what many of our people are, left out of the political process. So this is an alternate way to bring people back in the political process. You may not even read and write in your native or your vernacular that you grew up with. It may not even be on paper. Particularly since we, as African people, have a history of having oral translations of our history, our culture, where we are. Part of that is also why people were able to negatively impact us and say we were uncivilized. We know that's garbage, right? So if I can't even put into my own vernacular the issues, how are people who cannot even read English or French or Portuguese or whatever the case may be going to truly articulate what I'm running on, how I'm going to
Afrique,
positively
mon Afrique,
benefit them.
c'est un peu ça, la semaine de la femme. Nous allons rester connectés, nous allons continuer à vous faire voir les conférences, les débats dont les femmes sont en train de montrer leur talent ici. Et bon, nous aurons des conférences en français, en anglais, mais bon, dommage pour les gens de l'expression française ne pourront pas traduire tous les petits mots ici. Mais retenez tout simplement que c'est la journée internationale de la femme, le mois de la femme, et les femmes se sont regroupées pour partager leurs connaissances dans les différentes filières où elles sont. Et celle-ci, elle expose dans sa filière sa vision de l'Afrique et de comment l'Afrique pourrait faire pour trouver d'éventuelles solutions pour émerger mieux qu'avant. Ou alors, elle parle des problèmes qui arrivent sur le continent africain qui empêche que le continent africain soit libre de ses actions. Afrique, mon Afrique, restez connectés jusqu'à la fin de ce mois de mars. Nous serons là en français et en anglais pour vous faire suivre toutes les activités des femmes, spécialement ici sur le continent américain ici.
We have to be relevant with where our people are. And when we begin to not know where our people are and we are outside of our people, we then become anti-people. We're not with the people. We have to be in the people's class, not in the anti-people's class. And sometimes we need to be clear that we get degrees, we get a job, we get a few bucks in our pockets, and we become better than. Right? We become better than, but be clear. You can be unemployed at the unemployment line, on the corner, selling you some ground nuts to make your living just like the next African. Sometimes we're confused about that, right? Sometimes we think we got a big check coming in every 2 weeks. But truth be told, we got $3.50 in our account. You feel me? Okay? So we're confused because we don't really have any real wealth because our wealth is on the African continent, which we don't control. Okay. Print, and I'm going to breeze through this, but they also use print media, newspapers. We have many avenues today that we can use in order to bring Pan-African consciousness and Pan-Africanism to our people. Church, some people go to church. You can put a blurb in your church news bulletin. Now, I don't know how many people in here are Christians, so I don't want to embarrass you if you are or aren't, or I don't want to embarrass you if you're Muslim if you are or aren't, right? I'm neither of those, okay? However, what I do know is that the principles in which we are trying to achieve as Pan-Africanists, that objective is very similar and is almost parallel to those principles that Christians and Muslims and this one and that one are trying to achieve in their life, right? Yes. In their life in order to be delivered, right? So why can you not show your fellow parishioners how Pan-Africanism is a good fit because it models what you're already trying to do? But that's about transforming your ideology, because what happens is just because you have those principles, what happens is you're still governed by capitalist ideology, and so therefore you don't understand how you have a responsibility to the African continent and the African people outside of where you are. Moving along. All right, so I have 5 elements of how we can achieve Pan-Africanism. The first one is to get organized. Now let me ask, how many people in this room are in an organization? Okay, so we have about half. So there's some people in here who are not in organizations. Now let me ask you this. How many liberation struggles in the African continent were won without organizations? Any? No. None, right? So we cannot be Pan-Africanists unless we're in organizations. Now that's not to just people who are not in organizations, because we understand there's a time and a place. You may have some things going on in your life. You may not be ready. But I really want to behoove you all to be in an organization, because we know that we would still be enslaved right now if it was not for organization. Africa would still be fully colonized if it was not for organization. So we cannot turn our back on our history. If history shows us that organization is the way to liberation, we cannot say, I individually am Jiba Frehewa am the survivor. the savior of African people. And my contribution is going to make us free, because it's not. Because if Robert Sobukwe couldn't do it, if Rosa Parks couldn't do it, why in the world do I think that my individual contribution can do it? It takes millions of African people in organizations to do that. Here's just some examples. In the Zambia, PAC, ANC, Azapo, Libya, the Jamhuriya, Ghana, the UGCC, CPP, etc., etc. We talked about transforming our ideology. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you know. And then this is something that's very significant. Bridge the gap between Africans born at home and Africans born in the diaspora. Now this is a really nice crowd, right? How many Africans here were born at home? How many born in the diaspora? So we got about 50-50 in this room. This is not the way it usually is. Y'all know it, right? You go to a meeting on Pan-Africanism, you have all Africans born in the diaspora. You go to a meeting on Pan-Africanism, you have all Africans born at home. And in some cases, it's all Cameroonians. In some cases, it's all Africans born in D.C. So not only are we trying to achieve Pan-Africanism, the total liberation and unification of Africa, but we can't even be in the same room with each other. Something is wrong with that. Now, we're clear that it's not by, cause that we hate each other and we don't want to be around Africans born at home in the diaspora. We're clear about that, right? But we, as African people, have to overcome that. We have to overcome the reasons why we're being held back and why we're not able to unify as African people. That doesn't mean you divorce your culture. And this is the same excuse and lie that people use about Africa unifying. There's 56 countries. There's thousands of languages. There's this culture. There's that. Well, Europe has shown that doesn't matter, right? Mm-hmm. So we're clear that that's not the case. We're clear that African people migrated. We weren't spread out throughout the African continent as we are now, right? So we migrated from place to place. And there's translators. And most people speak some language that can be translated into something else that someone can understand. And if we really stop and deeply look at our culture, we'll see that it's very similar. We'll see that the differences are minute, they're there, but they should be celebrated. But they should not be exploited, which is what happens. Okay, 4, build Pan-African institutions. This conference series is an institution where people can come and get information about Pan-Africanism. But don't stop here. Move beyond that. Organizations, schools, the Ghana Young Pioneer Movement is an example. Why can't we have an African Young Pioneer Movement? We have African youth everywhere that need some level of direction. What's our job as people who have come before? Those that come after us, we have some responsibility to give back. But we can't just give back willy-nilly. There has to be some level of organization to it. And how many of us got to where we got without somebody helping us? Nobody in this room. So how is it okay for us not to do the same for our youth? And then, of course, Pan-African governments. And this becomes a little bit tricky on the African continent right now because there's not that many that are specifically Pan-African, or even if they're saying they're Pan-African, they're not necessarily espousing those principles. But there are certain elements within the government that perhaps are more Pan-African. And at the end of the day, when there are organizations or underground parties that are organizing to take over power at the next election or to have a coup, perhaps if we can organize those forces with some level of Pan-African education so that when they do end up taking power, right, because we know that happens, it's going to change and change and change, then there's a different thought process. It's not about me, but it's about the collective. How can I benefit Africa? And be clear, and I want y'all to be clear, I'm not confused. The party is not idealistic and think that we're just going to snap our fingers and that Africa's going to be liberated. We're clear that if you take power and you've got, $2 billion in IMF debt, and you got to feed your people, and the only thing that you're able to buy imported rice and chicken and bread with is the money that you get from the IMF and World Bank. We get that. But there has to be a progression. There has to be a way for Africa to be independent. So if you have folks that have a different thought process, right, then perhaps the strategy is not just about taking IMF and World Bank loans, but in 5 years or 10 years, we can take the majority of the cash crop fields or land, and that can be somewhere where we're growing our food. That could be somewhere where we're grazing our goats and our chickens so we can feed our people. Because what do you really need? Our people need some food. They need some shelter. We do need some electricity, but ultimately at the end of the day, not necessarily a necessity. You won't die without electricity, right? You need water. So we have to get to a point where we can transition, we can provide that for our people. But we know that we can't provide that if we're connected to the IMF and World Bank. I'm going to make this great quick point, and then I'm going to sit. I heard recently that South Africa is importing frozen chickens from the U.S. Like, I'm not a chicken connoisseur. I mean, I'm not a chicken specialist, right? I don't raise chickens. I don't know the first thing about farming or chickens and none of that. But I do know that if you can raise chickens on your land, it'll be fresher than a frozen chicken. I do know that the U.S. and South Africa are not around the corner from each other, which means you gotta raise the chickens, you gotta kill the chickens, you gotta process the chickens, you gotta freeze the chickens, you gotta put them on a plane, they gotta get there, they gotta be processed, they gotta blah, 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 blah. By the time I get the chicken in Cape Town, it's sick, it's 4 months later, and I'm wondering why we have high rates of cancer. I'm wondering why we have our children that are struggling with obesity. I'm wondering why our African farmers who have a small plot of land and are trying to feed their families cannot sell their $4 chicken because the $2 chicken's coming in. And we need to be real clear. I'm going to be honest. If I got 3 children and I got $4 and I go to the market, right, and I'm not thinking as a Pan-Africanist, and I see the brother selling the $2 a piece chickens that came in from the U.S., and I see the sister selling a nice fresh chicken that's running around for $4. I'm buying 2 of these chickens. Because these 2 chickens are going to feed my babies for 2 weeks, maybe a week. Versus this 1 chicken that's maybe will feed my baby for a half a week. So I get that, but those of us who have access to this information, have a responsibility to do really 3 things. 1, to expose folks who don't have access, because we didn't always have access, right? 2, to really struggle to build some of these institutions so that we have a foundation, because we don't have a foundation right now. The Pan-African Conference Series was a foundation. We don't have a foundation. And then 3, to make sure that we integrate Pan-African ideology and principles into our everyday lives. We can't be a Pan-Africanist 1 Saturday a month. You see? Because I'm a Pan-Africanist today, but tomorrow I'm a capitalist, right? And I'm trying to get over on you and this one and the next one. I'm worried about the Gucci shoes and what I do and what I have and if I have the biggest house. That doesn't make any sense. And let me just tell you that material is, and I know I said I was closing, but you know, people who talk, they talk all the time. They say they're closing, they don't close, but this is a real close. So I have a sister who sends money back. She's sending money back home to build her mother's house. She built the house finally, right? She would send money to her mother for food. Her mother would not use the money for food, but to pay electricity, because she had such a symbol in the community that she had electricity. She did not want anyone in the community to know that she didn't have electricity in her nice new big house. But you ain't eating. You ain't got no rice, no millet. You ain't got an old chicken that came from the U.S. 2 months ago. You ain't got nothing. But you got electricity. This is part of the capitalist mentality, which says that we have to have this material in order to prove that we don't hate ourselves, that we don't have internalized self-hatred that comes from the education, both formal and informal, that we receive every day, all day. If we don't want our children to be here talking about this sister right here, look, she's about 10 years. If we don't want her to be saying the same thing in 20 years, it's our responsibility to move us to the next level. Thank you for all of that.